Okay, so today we're diving back into the
We
Enneagram.
enter the Enneagram.
But this time we're really going deep with the self-preservation too. And we know you guys are already pretty familiar with the Enneagram,
Hmm.
so we're not going to bore you with all the basics. We're going to try to dissect the nuances of this subtype through the lens of a fictional character.
Ooh, fun.
Miki Koishikawa from Marmalade Boy. Have you ever seen that?
Oh, I have,
You
yeah.
have, okay.
It's a classic.
Yeah. I think it's pretty fascinating how fictional characters can offer such a pure view of Enneagram types.
It's true, yeah. They embody the essence without all the messy complexities of, real life.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So Miki, in particular, I think is a pretty clear example of the self-preservation too.
Oh, absolutely. Her story is so vivid, and it really brings those core motivations and anxieties of the self-preservation too to life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So speaking of core characteristics, let's start with that, eternal child aspect of the self-preservation too.
Okay, yeah.
It's not just about, being kind of youthful and bubbly. There's a deeper layer to it.
Right. It's more about this fundamental need to be cared for, to have someone else take the lead, to feel safe and protected in the world.
Hmm. I see. So it ties directly into the idea of privilege that's often associated with this subtype.
Yeah, it really does, because it's not just about acting childish, it's also about an underlying expectation that their needs will be met, that others will naturally cater to them.
Okay. So it's not a conscious manipulation. It's more like an unconscious expectation.
Right, it's like their operating system. They were often raised in environments where they were the center of attention, where
Yeah.
their needs were prioritized, and that shapes their perception of how the world works.
Yeah, that makes sense. And if you think about Mickey's family dynamic, she's always been kind of the center of attention, surrounded by people who prioritize her emotional well-being. So she kind of exists in this protective bubble of emotional support.
Exactly, and that bubble really reinforces that sense of privilege, that unconscious expectation of being taken care of.
Okay, so we've got the eternal child, we've got the privilege aspect. Let's talk about dependency, which is another big one for the self-preservation too.
Yeah, it's a biggie. And it can be a bit paradoxical because on the surface, they might seem very independent and capable, but underneath, there's this deep yearning for someone to lean on, to rely on.
It's like they're projecting this image of self-sufficiency while secretly craving that reassurance and security that comes from having someone else in control.
Exactly. Like they want to appear strong and capable, but they also want to be taken care of. And this dynamic plays out so clearly in Miski's relationship with you.
Yeah, that's a good example. She really relies on him for so much, right?
She does, for validation, for decision making, even for protection during those inevitable emotional storms. It's a textbook example of how the self-preservation two's need for dependency shows up in romantic relationships.
Okay, so we've got the eternal child, the privilege, the dependency. Now let's layer in that intense emotional sensitivity that's so characteristic of the self-preservation too.
Yes, their feelings run deep, don't they? And it's
Yes.
important to remember it's not a calculated tactic. It's a genuine outpouring of their emotional world. They really do experience everything so intensely. And, they often lack the tools to regulate those big feelings.
Yeah. So it's like they're walking around without an emotional shield, constantly vulnerable to every little slight.
Yes, exactly. And that vulnerability can be both incredibly endearing and utterly exhausting for those around them.
Oh, totally.
It
Yeah.
requires a certain level of patience and understanding to navigate.
For sure. So, speaking of navigating emotions, we can't forget about Mankey's tendency to escape into fantasy.
Ah, yes, the dream
It's
world.
like she's a master at romanticizing situations, especially when it comes to, her relationship with you.
It's a classic coping mechanism for the self-preservation too. When reality feels too harsh or unpredictable, they retreat into this idealized world where their needs are met effortlessly, where love is perfect, where they're cherished unconditionally.
Yeah, it's like creating their own personal emotional safe haven.
Exactly. A place where they feel truly seen and loved. But, while that can provide temporary relief, it can also prevent them from fully engaging with reality and developing healthier ways of coping with life's challenges.
Right, which brings us to another key aspect of Miki's personality, and I think this one often gets intertwined with that tendency to escape into fantasy, shyness.
Ah, yes, shyness. It's rooted in that deep-seated fear of exposure without that guaranteed recognition. Like, they're hesitant to put themselves out there unless they're absolutely certain of a positive response.
It's like they're constantly testing the waters, making sure it's safe to be vulnerable before taking that leap of faith.
Precisely. And that fear can manifest in different ways. Miki, for example, she hesitates in new situations, seeks constant reassurance, and can withdraw completely when she feels uncertain or insecure, especially in the early stages of a relationship.
Yeah, it's all about minimizing risk, right?
Yeah.
Protecting that tender heart from potential hurt.
Exactly.
But here's the thing, despite all this, all this emotional complexity, the self-preservation too, also possesses this incredible capacity for tenderness and affection.
Oh, absolutely. They have this natural warmth, this compassion that just draws people to them. Miki, for instance, she's so caring, so gentle in her approach to relationships, and she's always ready to offer a shoulder to cry on.
It's like they have an endless supply of empathy, you know?
They do, yeah. They're incredibly attuned to the needs of others, even while they might be struggling with their own emotional needs. And they derive a real sense of worth from nurturing and caring for others.
Okay, so we've talked about the tenderness, the empathy, the caring. But let's be real for a second. We can't ignore those self-indulgent tendencies that sometimes pop up in the self-preservation too.
Yes, the shadow side. And it's important to emphasize this isn't about them being intentionally manipulative. It really stems from those underdeveloped emotional regulation skills we were talking about.
Right, right. So you see it in like Mikey's emotional expressiveness, her difficulty delaying gratification, those occasional tantrums when things don't go her way. It's like, they're still learning how to manage those big feelings.
Exactly. And it's a journey. It takes time, self-awareness, and a willingness to really explore those deeper emotional patterns.
So I feel like we've covered a lot of ground here. We've explored the eternal child, the privilege, the dependency, the emotional sensitivity, the fantasy, shyness, tenderness, even those self-indulgent tendencies. It's a lot.
It is a lot, yeah. But it really paints such a clear picture of the self-preservation too.
It does. And I think it's important to remember that all these traits, these patterns, they're just a natural expression of Misi's personality type.
It's just who she is.
Yeah, and that's what makes her such a perfect case study for understanding this subtype. She shows us that these patterns aren't about being good or bad. They're about recognizing that everyone, no matter their Enneagram type, is doing the best they can with the tools they have.
Absolutely. And sometimes those tools need a little sharpening. That's where the power of self-awareness comes in.
Right, that's so key. By understanding our own patterns and motivations, we can start making more conscious choices, building healthier relationships, and, well, just living more fulfilling lives.
Yeah, totally.
Okay, so we've laid out the theoretical framework. Let's bring it to life with some specific examples from Marmalade Boy. Let's see these self-preservation 2 dynamics in action.
Let's do it, because that's where the real learning happens. When we connect those theoretical dots to real life, or in this case, fictional examples.
Right, so let's start with Maggie's reaction to her parents' rather unconventional, divorce and remarriage.
Yes.
Talk about a family crisis that would shake anyone's sense of security, right?
Yeah, talk about upheaval. And it's such a perfect illustration of those self-preservation two dynamics in action. Initially, you see Mikey reacting in a very childlike way. She runs away, creates a scene, really lets those raw emotions just explode. It's like that inner child is taking over, desperately seeking comfort and attention.
Yeah, like that sense of security is just completely shattered.
Exactly. And then you see a shift. She starts seeking approval from everyone involved, trying to adapt to this new, strange family structure from a good girl position, almost like she's trying to earn back that sense of love and security that was lost.
So it's like she's trying to rebuild that emotional fortress you were talking about.
Exactly. And this pattern, this need to please and adapt to maintain that sense of love and security, it repeats itself throughout the series, especially, as you might guess, in her relationship with you.
Ah, yes, the you dynamic.
A roller coaster, for sure.
It is, it is.
It perfectly captures that interplay between dependency and privilege that we were talking about.
Yeah. So walk us through some key moments that really illustrate this dynamic. What jumps out at you?
Well, take, for example, how Miki constantly seeks Yu's validation. She needs him to constantly confirm her feelings, to reassure her that she's loved and worthy.
It's like she needs that constant approval just to feel secure in the relationship, to quiet those fears of abandonment that are always lurking beneath the surface.
Exactly. And then there's her reliance on him for basic decision making. She often just defers to him, especially when it comes to difficult or challenging situations. It's like she wants him to take the lead, to shield her from potential harm.
Almost like she sees him as her knight in shining armor, ready to rescue her from any threat.
Right. And, Yu, being the caring and supportive person he is, often fulfills that role, so you can see how this can further reinforce Miki's dependency.
It's like a self-fulfilling prophecy almost.
It is, and it's fascinating to watch unfold, you know? You see the self-preservation two's inner world playing out in these very real, relatable ways.
Yeah, and while it can be quite endearing at times, I think it also highlights those potential pitfalls of this subtype, right?
Mhm.
If they don't develop a stronger sense of self-reliance, a stronger sense of emotional independence.
Totally. It's a delicate balance.
Okay, so we've delved into Miki's family dynamic, her romantic relationship with you. Let's talk about her friendships. Do we see those same self-preservation two patterns emerging there?
We do, yeah. Her relationships with Maiko and Jinta offer some really interesting insights into how these dynamics play out in platonic relationships.
Okay. So remind us, what were some of those key elements of the self-preservation two that we've been talking about?
Well, we talked about the need for constant emotional support, that desire to feel needed and appreciated.
Right. It's like they thrive on being the one everyone turns to for advice and comfort.
Exactly. And you see that so clearly in Mickey's friendships. She's always there for them, providing that listening ear, offering comfort, going above and beyond to make them feel loved and supported.
But there's also a subtle tendency to be the emotional center of attention, right? Like they need to be the one everyone relies on, the one who holds the group together.
It's true. It ties back to that need for validation, for recognition. They want to feel indispensable. It's like they're seeking proof of their worthiness through the care and attention they give to others.
So while this can create those really strong bonds, I think it also highlights the importance of balance, right?
Exactly. The self-preservation, too, needs to find a balance to create relationships that are mutually supportive and fulfilling rather than solely focused on their own needs.
Okay, so we've explored Miki's personality through these different lenses. Family, romance, friendships. What's the key takeaway here? What makes her such a classic example of the self-preservation too?
Well, I think what's striking is just how naturally all of those self-preservation two traits flow from her. It's not about conscious strategies or manipulation. It's just her genuine way of being in the world.
So it's not an act. It's not a performance. It's just her authentic self.
Exactly. And that's what makes her such a compelling case study, I think. She shows us that these patterns aren't about being bad or manipulative. They're about navigating life with a certain set of emotional needs and coping mechanisms. It's about understanding that we all have our unique ways of being, and those ways are often shaped by our deepest fears and desires.
Yeah, and that's powerful because by understanding those fears and desires, I think we can start building bridges instead of walls. You know, we can communicate more effectively, navigate relationships with more understanding and empathy.
Absolutely. It's about recognizing that we're all connected. We're all part of this beautiful, messy tapestry of human experience.
Well said. Okay, so we spent a good chunk of time really dissecting Mickey's character, getting into the nitty-gritty of the self-preservation too. But let's shift gears a little bit and talk about the practical side of things.
Okay.
You know, how does all this knowledge about the self-preservation, too, how does it actually help us, in our own lives,
Yeah.
in our relationships with people who embody these traits? What's the takeaway?
That's the million-dollar question, right? I think the real power of the Enneagram, especially when you start digging into the subtypes, is that it gives us this incredible roadmap for understanding ourselves and others
Yeah.
on a deeper level.
It's not just about labeling people or putting them in boxes, right?
Mm-mm.
It's about cultivating that empathy,
Right. Yeah.
really trying to see the world through their eyes, understanding the why behind their actions.
Exactly. Understanding the motivations, those deep-seated fears and desires that shape how they interact with the world.
Yeah, and with the self-preservation too, those fears and desires, they can be pretty intense,
Yeah, they can be, yeah.
That fear of being unloved, that need to feel needed and appreciated, it can really drive their behavior.
It can. And that's why it's so crucial to understand these dynamics, especially if you're in a relationship with a self-preservation too. It's about meeting them where they are, recognizing those needs, but also finding ways to navigate those needs without sacrificing your own well-being. It's a dance, for sure.
Yeah, for sure. So let's get really specific here.
Okay.
Let's say you're in a relationship with someone who, exhibits some of these self-preservation two tendencies. What are some practical tips?
Right.
What are some strategies for navigating that in a healthy way?
Okay, well, one of the most important things to remember is that self-preservation twos really thrive on feeling needed and appreciated.
Hmm.
They have this deep desire to be of service, to nurture and care for those they love. It's part of their core wiring.
Yeah. So how do you like how do we acknowledge that, validate that need
Mm.
without getting like sucked into this codependent dynamic where you're constantly catering to them and they're constantly relying on you?
That's the balancing act, right?
Mm.
It's about finding that sweet spot where you're recognizing their generosity, expressing genuine appreciation for their efforts, but also setting clear boundaries.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so for example, y if a self-preservation too is constantly like offering unsolicited advice or trying to like fix all your problems, how do you handle that
Yeah.
without making them feel like rejected or unappreciated?
Yeah, that's a tough one. I think communication is key, as in any relationship.
Sure.
So just gently but directly expressing your gratitude for their concern,
Okay.
but also asserting your need to handle things independently. You could say something like, hey, I really appreciate you wanting to help,
Yeah.
but I need to work through this on my own right now. I'll definitely reach out if I need your support.
Right. So it's not shutting them down.
Right.
It's about creating that space where both people feel respected.
Exactly.
Okay. Um, what about that tendency towards dependency?
Yes.
That reliance on others for validation, for decision making. Like, how can we encourage them to like develop a stronger sense of self-reliance
Yeah.
without, crushing their self-esteem?
It's a dance. It really is. And it takes a lot of patience and empathy. But I think the key is to gently nudge them towards independence,
Hmm.
encouraging them to explore their own interests, develop their own coping mechanisms, start to trust their own inner compass.
Yeah. So instead of like always rushing in to rescue them
Yeah.
or solve their problems,
Right.
just kind of create that space for them to figure things out on their own.
Exactly. Give them the opportunity to make their own choices and, experience the natural consequences of
Yeah.
those choices. And it's important to do this with love and encouragement, not judgment or criticism.
Yeah.
Because remember, self-preservation twos are incredibly sensitive to rejection.
Right.
So approaching these conversations with understanding and sensitivity is key.
Speaking of sensitivity, emotional sensitivity is, kind of a hallmark of the self-preservation too.
Yeah. It is.
They feel things so deeply. They can be like so easily hurt by criticism,
Yeah.
or rejection, even perceived rejection.
Right.
So how do we communicate with them, effectively,
Yeah.
especially when giving feedback,
Yeah.
or addressing those like difficult topics?
Well, it's all about being mindful of that emotional vulnerability. So when you're offering feedback, focus on specific behaviors
Okay.
rather than making sweeping generalizations
Okay.
or attacking their character.
Right.
Right.
So like instead of saying you're always so oversensitive,
Yeah.
which is like a punch in the gut, right?
Right.
You could say something like, I noticed you seemed upset when I mentioned that. Could you tell me more about what you were feeling?
Exactly. Invite them to share their perspective
Mm-hmm.
without judgment.
Yeah.
That creates a much safer space for open dialogue.
And it's about validating their feelings, even if you don't agree with their perspective.
Yes, absolutely. Validation doesn't equal agreement.
Right.
Right. It just means acknowledging that their emotional experience is real and valid.
Right.
So you might say something like, I hear that you're feeling hurt, and I understand why you would feel that way.
So it's about creating that space where they feel safe to like really express themselves without fear of judgment. And I think that feeling of safety, that's so crucial for the self-preservation too, because deep down, I think they just want to feel loved
Yeah,
and accepted for who they are.
absolutely. And by modeling that kind of empathetic communication, you can actually help them develop those emotional regulation skills.
Yeah.
Build that inner resilience that allows them to navigate challenges without feeling overwhelmed.
Now, we talked earlier about the self-preservation two's tendency to kind of like escape into fantasy, right? Romanticize situations, especially in relationships. How do we help them kind of stay grounded in reality without, crushing their dreams or like dimming their optimism?
A tough one.
It is, yeah.
I think one approach is to gently challenge their idealized perspectives, but always acknowledge those positive aspects of their hopeful outlook.
Okay.
So, for example, if they're constantly fantasizing about this unrealistic romantic scenario, you might say, hey, I love how optimistic you are.
Yeah.
But it's important to remember that real relationships require effort and compromise.
Mm.
How about we brainstorm some practical steps, to help you move towards your goals?
So it's about like grounding their dreams in reality,
Yeah,
but without extinguishing that spark, that hope.
exactly.
And again, it's about doing this with support and encouragement, not
And
criticism.
criticism, yeah.
We want to be their allies.
Yeah, for sure.
Shyness can be a big hurdle for the self-preservation too,
Yeah.
especially when it comes to like putting themselves out there, trying new things or forming new relationships.
It can be.
So how do we encourage them to like step outside their comfort zones
Yeah.
without overwhelming them or, triggering those deep-seated fears?
It's about creating that safe, supportive environment where they feel comfortable taking risks, even small ones. Start by acknowledging their fears, validating their need for reassurance. You could say something like, hey, I know it can be scary to try new things, but I'm here to support you. We can do this together.
And then it's about offering like gentle encouragement,
Right.
maybe suggesting those baby steps.
Yeah.
Small challenges that will kind of build their confidence.
And celebrate those successes.
Yeah.
No matter how small.
Yeah.
Positive reinforcement can be really powerful.
Totally, yeah. Okay, so we've been like really focused on the challenges of being in a relationship with a self-preservation too. But let's not forget about all the amazing gifts they bring to the table.
Oh, there's so many. Yeah.
Their tenderness, empathy, their loyalty.
Their loyalty, yeah.
Those are incredible qualities.
They really are. They are some of the most loving and supportive people you'll ever meet.
They have this amazing capacity to make you feel seen and heard and like loved unconditionally.
Yeah, it's true.
They're always there to listen, to offer a shoulder to cry on,
Yeah.
to celebrate your victories.
Always celebrating your victories.
Their generosity, it knows no bounds.
It really doesn't.
They're
above and beyond.
They go above and beyond.
Yeah.
To make you feel special, to support you, to nurture your dreams.
Absolutely.
They're the kind of people who will always have your back.
They do.
Always. No matter what. And that warmth, that compassion, it's healing.
It is.
It's really healing.
It really is.
It creates this feeling of safety, of belonging. So while navigating those complexities, it can be challenging. The rewards are immeasurable.
They are. They truly are.
They really are.
Yeah.
And I think, as they learn to embrace their own needs, to develop that stronger sense of self-reliance, their capacity for love and connection only deepens.
Absolutely. It's like they're blooming from the inside out.
Yeah.
Becoming even more radiant.
So as we wrap up this this part of our deep dive, what's the key takeaway for our listeners who are, in relationships with self-preservation twos?
I think the most important thing is to really embrace that beauty, that loving, generous nature, and support their journey towards self-discovery. Remember that true love is about meeting each other's needs, but also honoring our own individual growth.
It's about creating a dynamic where both partners can really thrive.
Yeah.
Where love and independence coexist.
Yeah.
And that's beautiful.
That's something to strive for.
Yeah. All right. So welcome back to our deep dive into the self-preservation too. We spent the last, couple of parts really unpacking Miki's character, from Marmalade Boy.
Yeah.
Exploring those external behaviors that just scream self-preservation too. And we even touched on some practical tips for navigating those relationships.
Right.
But now it's time to go even deeper. Let's journey into the inner landscape of the self-preservation too. Uncover those hidden mechanisms that drive their actions, and really explore how those internal dynamics play out in their relationships.
I love this. This is where it gets really fascinating because, you see, the self-preservation too, perhaps more than any other subtype, operates from this place of very deeply ingrained beliefs and subconscious patterns. So their actions, even though they might appear to be reactions to external circumstances, are actually rooted in a much more complex web of internal needs and fears.
Okay, so let's untangle this web a little bit.
Okay.
What are some of those core fears that lie at the heart, the self-preservation too?
Well, at the very core, it's this fear of being unloved and unwanted. It's this primal fear that's so deeply embedded, it really shapes their entire view of the world. And they carry this belief that their worthiness is conditional, dependent on their ability to please and care for others.
So they're constantly seeking external validation to fill this internal void.
Yeah, exactly. This fear of being alone, abandoned, uncared for, it really fuels this need to be indispensable. They strive to be so valuable, so essential that no one could ever imagine leaving them.
It's like they're trying to build this fortress, right, of love and support around them to protect themselves
Right.
from that pain of rejection.
I love that image, that fortress. It's so true. And that fortress often manifests as a web of dependencies, this network of relationships where they feel needed and valued.
Mhm.
But here's the thing, the more they depend on external validation, the more fragile that fortress actually becomes.
Yeah, it's like a self-perpetuating cycle, right?
It is.
The more they fear being unloved, the more they try to, like, control and manipulate their environment to make sure that they are loved,
Yeah.
which can actually push people away.
Exactly. It's a classic catch-22. And this is where we see those defense mechanisms come into play.
Okay, so let's talk about those defense mechanisms.
Yeah.
Like, what are some of the ways that self-preservation twos, try to shield themselves from that fear of rejection and abandonment?
Well, one of the most common is repression.
Okay.
They push down their own needs, their own desires. They bury them so deep that they become practically invisible.
Mm.
They convince themselves that their own happiness is just secondary.
So it's like they're living in this constant state of, like, self-denial.
Exactly, self-denial. And that often manifests as a need to please, to anticipate the needs of others, to go above and beyond to make sure everyone else is happy.
Yeah.
They become masters at reading people. They can sense what someone needs before they even ask.
It's like a superpower almost.
It is. It's incredible.
Wow.
And it can be this beautiful quality, a real gift they bring to relationships, but it can also be a burden
Yeah.
because they might be neglecting their own needs.
Yeah, for sure. Another defense mechanism that you often see in self-preservation twos is reaction formation.
Oh, yes.
Can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, so it's basically transforming unacceptable impulses into their opposite. So for instance, let's say a self-preservation 2 feels, resentful or angry towards someone they're dependent on. They might actually overcompensate with these really exaggerated displays of affection.
So they're like masking those true feelings with like a veneer of sweetness and generosity.
Exactly. And that can be really confusing, for the other person in the relationship because it's hard to tell what's genuine and what's, part of this act.
Right. Okay. Let's talk about emotional triggers. What are some of the things that tend to like set off those deep-seated fears in self-preservation twos?
Well, anything that threatens their sense of security or belonging can be a trigger.
Mm.
So it could be a perceived rejection, even a slight criticism, a change of plans, or even something as simple as someone not needing their help.
So like their whole emotional stability is built on this foundation of feeling needed
Exactly.
and appreciated. And any like crack in that foundation can just like trigger a whole avalanche of like insecurity and anxiety.
That's a great way to put it, an avalanche. And when those fears get triggered, that's when you might see those, more childlike tendencies come to the surface. They might become demanding, clingy, maybe even manipulative in their attempts to regain control and restore that sense of security.
It's like that inner child is just like panicking.
Yeah, it's like they're back in childhood feeling completely overwhelmed and helpless.
Yeah.
And understanding this dynamic, this link between those core fears and those defense mechanisms, it's so essential for anyone who wants to build a healthy and compassionate relationship with a self-preservation too.
So we've explored those fears, the defenses, the triggers. It's a lot, right? It's a very complex landscape.
It is, yeah. But understanding this can be so helpful in building those fulfilling relationships. But here's the good news.
Oh,
Self-preservation twos have this incredible capacity for growth
oh, that's great.
and transformation. As they become more aware, as they challenge those limiting beliefs and start developing healthier coping mechanisms, they can actually break free from those self-defeating patterns and really step into their full potential.
So it's not about trying to change who they are at their core.
Right.
It's about supporting that evolution.
Right.
Like helping them become the best version of themselves.
Exactly. And that journey can be so empowering for the self-preservation too, as they learn to value their own needs, set those healthy boundaries, and cultivate that deeper sense of inner security. They discover this amazing strength and resilience that maybe they didn't even know they had.
And that newfound strength allows them to connect with others from this place of like real authenticity, to give and receive love without that fear, without the manipulation. It's like they're moving from a scarcity mindset, that belief that love is conditional, to a place of abundance,
Yeah.
knowing that they are inherently worthy of love and belonging.
Beautifully said. It's about reclaiming their hearts, rediscovering that unconditional love that resides within. And as they do that, they become a beacon of warmth and compassion, illuminating the world with their generous spirit.
Wow, what an incredible journey we've taken today. Exploring this intricate world of the self-preservation too, we've delved into their motivations, fears, defenses, their incredible capacity for growth and transformation, and we really hope this deep dive has given you a richer understanding of this really complex and fascinating subtype, and that it inspires you to continue exploring this amazing diversity of human experience. So until next time, keep learning, keep growing, and keep diving deep.